Oh my, that's a tough one. Awesome.
Thank you.
My name is Michael Del Castillo. I'm senior editor at Forbes, in charge of blockchain and cryptocurrency. In addition to writing my own articles, I work with a small team called Forbes Digital Assets and manage a group of about 60 contributors, all covering just blockchain and any application of blockchain, including Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So I've been at Forbes for almost 4 years. But this October 2021, was the 10-year anniversary of my first Bitcoin article. And back in 2011, I had just graduated with my master's degree from Columbia University. And I didn't really care too much about business. In fact, as a kid, I used to make fun of people in suits, wearing the same clothes every day and taking briefcases to the office. And I was kind of desperately looking for a field of business that invigorated me intellectually and stimulated my mind, but also kind of let me be a little bit of a rebel and an outsider. And in October 2011, I discovered Bitcoin, wrote my first article complete with a brief history of Satoshi Nakamoto, and haven't really ever looked back since. Where am I in Kenya? I'm in Westlands. Which is a pretty nice neighborhood. It's large, it's very walkable. My wife and I picked it specifically because we don't have a car. We wanted to be able to experience the culture, the nightlife, the food. There was, there was definitely some nicer neighborhoods, but honestly, they were so separated from the rest of the city that we didn't think that we were going to get what we were looking for. And we're in a place called Kai Towers. We rented an Airbnb here, and quite frankly, we've really settled in. We feel at home, and we're actually really sad to leave soon. So I started off my time here with a tweet, just telling my followers that I was going to be in Kenya, and I kind of knew some of its past accomplishments in crypto. But I didn't really know what was going on. And since then, I should say in direct response to that tweet, I was able to set up a meeting with 5 incredibly diverse cryptocurrency entrepreneurs, doing everything from founding companies to writing code, working with regulators. And from there, it just kind of spiraled out into all kinds of different stuff. I was really excited to have a chance to go to a town called Kilifi on the shores of Kenya. My first time in the Indian Ocean was fun. And got to see the Sarafu network up and running, which is a cryptocurrency that's designed to make sure that financial aid that is provided from the United Nations and other global organizations actually stays within the community. There's a problem of aid being delivered, in time of famine or other needs, and within 48 hours that money is in Nairobi. And the folks at Sarafu have basically created a cryptocurrency designed to help, as he puts it, plug the leaky bucket. And I love the idea of sort of using cryptocurrency to create network effects within a community, so that that incentivizes the money to stay where it's designed to help. And then we've even from securities applications to local community currencies, all the way to what I think one of the most impressive aspects of the work in Kenya is specifically regarding crypto is the media coverage. So I've had a lot of fun getting to know the folks at Bitcoin KE and Kenyan Wall Street. I'm incredibly impressed with the developing community of writers out here. So I guess kind of in sum, it really does spread the gamut. And I came here with a really strong understanding of what was happening in the past, and what's happening now is 1,000 times more vibrant than I had ever imagined. Yeah, I think one of the things that really strikes me about what's happening in Kenya is that the people who are building cryptocurrency solutions are solving personal problems. And the familiarity with sort of alternative financial infrastructures as a result of Safaricom and the associated M-Pesa, which lets people send money using their phone numbers, I think has prepared the Kenyan people at large to think outside the box. And because they're already prepared to think outside the box, but Safaricom is quite frankly largely a monopoly in the space, there's a lot of opportunity to build and to improve and to improvise. And it's really cool to see individuals solving real problems using blockchain, specifically cryptocurrency, in a really tangible, concrete way. To compare that to the rest of Africa, now to be totally honest, I've only ever spent time in North Africa, and it was before this, and it was pre-cryptocurrency. But what I can tell you is before I came here, I really did shop around. I wanted to find what I thought was going to be a sort of hotbed for innovation. I get the impression that South Africa might have the most mature cryptocurrency applications. Again, that's not from firsthand experience, but just I know some of the folks there, and I think that they've been building for quite a while with support of banks and other financial institutions. I think that's followed closely maybe by Nigeria. Interestingly, though, for completely opposite reasons. Like, I think the folks in Nigeria are really kind of like out there in the wild. Like, there's not a lot of support from the government. There's not a lot of support from financial institutions. But there's also not a lot of accountability. So I think the folks there are really just like, devil may care, really taking risks and doing a lot of cool stuff. And I think Kenya's kind of somewhere in the middle there, where the cryptocurrency innovation isn't quite as mature as some of the stuff that's happening in South Africa, but it is mature. And it isn't quite so reckless and wild and crazy as the stuff that's happening in Nigeria, but it is still very open-minded. My biggest takeaway was really eye-opening for me personally, was that I was still, even though I've been writing about cryptocurrency for 10 years, I was still thinking about the economy in Africa linearly and in the old-fashioned way, which is to say that, let's start with the people in Africa that don't have bank accounts, and let's get them bank accounts. And then after they have bank accounts, let's get them cryptocurrency. And I got here and I started asking, a lot of the cryptocurrency innovators, what do you think when you hear companies in Silicon Valley raising these multi-million-dollar capital rounds to bank the unbanked in Africa? And time after time I was told, I feel angry, I feel upset, I feel overlooked. And quite frankly, what really shocked me was they were saying, leave Africa unbanked. Like, if you have a bank account, great, more power to you, right? But for the Africans, or specifically I should say the Kenyans who don't have bank accounts, a lot of them don't want bank accounts. And I love the comparison that they've given me, where it's like, a lot of African villages never had telephone lines. And they went straight to cell phones. And if somebody came up to one of those villages that now has cell phones and said, hey, why don't we bring some telephone wires to your village? They would laugh and say, no. That's like, it's going back in time to put telephone wires to these villages. And the comparison is that for these, for some of these people, I don't want to speak on behalf of all of Kenya or all of Africa, but for many of the Kenyans that I spoke to about this question, they don't want bank accounts for the same reason that they don't want telephone wires. They're building solutions for the next generation of commerce, just like they have solutions for the next generation of telecommunications. That was really eye-opening for me that some Africans, some Kenyans, I won't say all of them, but many of them that I spoke with don't want bank accounts. They want cryptocurrency wallets. Absolutely. I was really humbled to be invited by Bitcoin KE, Kenyan Wall Street, and the sponsor Cello to speak at a media lab in Nairobi to a group of 50 aspiring cryptocurrency reporters, including many mainstream reporters that hadn't really written much about cryptocurrency, or in some cases not at all. It was amazing. I got there a bit early before my talk, and I was able to hear some of the other speakers and what they had to say. And while I was listening, I literally went through my notes and made changes because I realized that the leaders here, the media leaders, whether or not it's researchers or reporters, analysts, media founders, are brilliant and were teaching me so much just during that short time that I realized that really what I had most to bring to that group was the perspective of an outsider. And I did present some basic journalism tips, which I'm happy to talk about in a second. But I wanted to really focus on two obstacles that I saw to cryptocurrency reporters in Kenya and Africa at large that specifically related to the outsider's perception, with the idea that, of course, you want to write stories that impact your neighbors and your fellow countrymen, and you want to write stories that relate to your fellow citizens of the continent as well. But like, if you are interested in connecting to a global audience, like, what is getting in the way there? One of the things that I think is getting in the way is that African innovators are able to do a lot more with a lot less. And the perception, because they're not raising these giant capital raises, is they're not getting traction. It just so happened that I was writing a venture capital story about a company that had raised $27 million for a team of 9 people. And I met several companies building cryptocurrency applications in Kenya with teams of 9 people or larger that hadn't raised any capital at all, or if they had raised capital, they'd maybe raised a couple $100,000. And so the obstacle there is reporters, I think, overly rely on investors to do their due diligence, and they make a correlation between the capital raised and the potential customer base. And so in Kenya, where they're able to do so much more with so much less, these reporters are overlooking these great stories. And you have to go behind the scenes and start asking questions like, how big is your team? What version is your code base at? And you have to start looking at metrics beyond the capital that's raised to get an idea of the stories that are told here. But that takes work, and it takes commitment to a region in a way that a lot of reporters who are based around the world aren't willing to do. And reporters in Kenya are perfectly qualified to do. The second obstacle, I know I'm rambling, the second obstacle was what I called the Nigerian prince problem. Again, I don't know how pervasive this is globally, but in the States years ago, every American got this email from somebody who was about ready to bail out a Nigerian prince, and if only you would help them bail the Nigerian prince out, he would certainly reward you with riches. And the folks that were behind that scam had such a negative impact on the perception of not just Nigeria, but the entire continent. And I can't tell you, if you have a conversation, any conversation about any African company with somebody outside of Africa for long enough, eventually they're going to mention the Nigerian prince scam. And it's a false red flag that people use to give an excuse to not invest or pay attention to innovation in Africa. It was, as far as I know, one group or, a series of groups of people that may or may not have even been in Africa, and people use it as an excuse to not pay attention to what's happening here. And so we reviewed a couple basic journalism techniques to hopefully help rise above that perception of outsiders and get to the heart of some true stories. Yeah, definitely. So I think what I really wanted to focus on was because of this perception that there's a high incidence, and it might be a reality too. I mean, because of this perception / potential reality that there's a higher incidence of fraud on the continent, at least compared to some other continents. I think the first thing, and I would encourage a reporter in Kenya or Africa to do, is to Google the name of the company they're writing about and all of the executives, the chief executive officer, the chief technical officer, the chief operating officer, the chief financial officer, followed by the word fraud. All right? And you don't need to not write the stories where you find something. If you Google the name of your company that you're writing about, followed by the word fraud, and you find some old stories, that doesn't mean you don't tell that story. It just means you tell that story in that light, right? Like it's not just our jobs to tell stories about the cool, positive innovations that's happening, but to tell cautionary tales too about the frauds that are out there, but to do it in an unbiased way. So that was the first thing I recommended, was to make sure you're doing your basic due diligence. To make sure you're not writing about a fraudulent company or a company that's been alleged of being fraudulent without sharing that with your audience. And then the second very simple Google search is the name of your company followed by the word competitors. In order to ensure that your articles aren't just press releases regurgitated based on what a third party wants you to write, you should make sure that you're considering the bigger industry that the company you're writing about is competing in. And you should mention the competitors by name. And occasionally, I think it's a good idea to even mention alternative ways to solve the same problem. So, because that could actually be seen as a weakness in the company that you're writing about's business model. If you can go into some other business models that might be doing it better. So I think those two very simple Google searches are often overlooked. I think the other one that I really would like to highlight is transparency. I'll stop and I'll say that one again. Another one that I'd like to highlight is transparency, which is to say that you should be transparent about your sourcing. Sourcing actually gives us credibility. And I think some reporters are shy to give other people credibility because they think it somehow undermines their own knowledge. And it's quite the opposite. I mean, the more sourcing you can do, the more evidence of interviews that you can share, the more evidence of reports that you read that you can share, the more evidence of other articles that you have read that you can share, the stronger your argument becomes. And as reporters, I think it's our job to sort of synthesize the world that's out there in a way that's digestible for our audience. And part of that is giving credit to the sources that we used. The other aspect of transparency that I think is really important is potential financial conflicts of interest. No one expects that we don't have conflicts of interest. In fact, I'll rephrase that. I think no reasonable person expects that we don't have any conflicts of interest. But I hope that every reasonable person expects that we disclose those conflicts of interest. So in media organizations, they are businesses, and there's nothing wrong with making money telling stories. But I encouraged the attendees at the Media Lab to consider, am I writing about a sponsor for my news site? If I am, I need to disclose that sponsorship. I should definitely, if I'm writing about a sponsor, I need to mention the competitors. Because that's a particularly important example of when we need to expand beyond just the company we're writing about to mention competitors in order to prevent from being accused of writing a PR release, a press release for our sponsor. And then the other potential, financial conflict of interest that I specifically mentioned, though there's more, is which cryptocurrencies do you own? As a reporter, I think that's really, really important. Even in traditional reporting, if you're writing about the auto industry and you own stock in Ford, you're going to be expected to disclose that you own that stock. If you're writing about big tech and you own stock in Google, you're going to be expected to disclose that. I think it's much more controversial in the cryptocurrency world because people seem to value their privacy more. But if you're writing about Bitcoin and you own Bitcoin, I firmly believe you should disclose that. You don't have to share how much, but you should share that you own. If you're writing about Ethereum, you should disclose that you have a stake in Ethereum, even if you don't disclose how much you have. I actually went even further than that and committed to my readers not to invest at all in cryptocurrency until I stopped being a reporter in the space. But I don't expect that everybody does that. First of all, on the advice front, it wouldn't be advice so much as encouragement. I think that the cryptocurrency entrepreneurs that I've met in Kenya were solving real problems of Kenyans and building companies that had inherently Kenyan feels to them. They were not trying to clone Silicon Valley companies. They were not trying to import Silicon Valley culture. They had their own discipline, they had their own work ethic, they had their own structures. They were solving unique problems. And I think that that's what they should keep doing. So again, it's not so much advice to refrain from copying Silicon Valley businesses and business models, but encouragement to continue not doing that. Because I think that's really, really, it's really important, it's exciting, and it contributes to the global innovation in a way that I think eventually Silicon Valley will be studying what's happening in Kenya and not the other way around. I think that's a kind of nice way to sort of piggyback into the second part of your question, which is, what does the future look like? And I can speak in really concrete details at that moment because I participated, and I didn't participate, I was an audience member in a meetup for aspiring blockchain developers, inspiring smart contract writers. And if I remember correctly, I think there were 72 people in the audience that day, and 3 of them had written smart contracts before. That means that the other 60 some odd people, depending on what that number was, had never written a smart contract and were there learning how to do it. To me, that means that's what the future looks like. If you go to a room in New York City or San Francisco for blockchain developers and you ask them to raise their hands, how many of you have written smart contracts before? I think you're going to get 60, 70, 80% have done so. And so that's more of a sample of what the present looks like. But to see such a room filled with so many aspiring blockchain developers shows, I think, we're on the cusp of an explosion of cryptocurrency and blockchain innovation in Kenya, and I believe in Africa at large. And if you want to be a part of that story, I think it's even more important that you don't water down your innovation by copying what's happening in Silicon Valley or New York. And you don't try to solve problems that don't exist here because you think you're going to have a better chance of getting venture capital. If you want to be where the future is, I think that the innovators in Kenya and Africa at large need to keep from watering down their brand. Need to keep from watering down their culture and their imagination by staying focused on what's happening here and making real, original, unique breakthroughs here with the expectation that eventually trillions of shillings and billions of dollars, there's a fun one to say, trillions of shillings and billions of dollars will be moving onto blockchain over the coming decade. And if you're not building for that future, but trying to capture something that happened in the recent past, you're going to really miss that opportunity. Ooh, I like that question. I'll tell you what, my wife and I have made so many amazing friends here, both in the cryptocurrency space. I would say mostly in the cryptocurrency space, but also just like strangers that we've met at the bar or at the park. The chances that Marissa and I, my wife and I, come back in the next 2 years are very high. I hope that this has become a regular communication that happens much more frequently than that. Oh my, that's a tough one. I'm really struck by what's happening with what we now call the metaverse. And it's basically just an extension of the idea of creating digital scarcity. So Bitcoin really rose to fame because the underlying blockchain allowed somebody to prove that a digital object was only in one place at a time without any central authority. That simple accomplishment has seen exponential effects as we've applied the ability to prove digital scarcity in all kinds of areas. Including most recently video games. Think of Super Mario Brothers coins, but with digital scarcity. And increasingly in the world of augmented reality and virtual reality. And the promise of all of these other kinds of applications of digital scarcity isn't new. I recently had a conversation with Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss, who were some of the earliest investors in what we now call the metaverse, though back then it was not called that. And basically it's this idea of an internet without servers, an uncensorable internet. And Tyler and Cameron, they've gotten a lot of grief over the years. They've sort of tested people's ideas of what it means to be an outsider. Because in the early days, they were the 6'2" model Olympic rowers, and Mark Zuckerberg was the little geeky, tech developer. And then Zuckerberg became the insider. They became the outsiders, and I think they've really owned up to that. And I like the idea that what it means to be an outsider can evolve. And that these guys who grew up in the lap of luxury and with all kinds of privileges are now making investments that could theoretically one day help empower people that have typically been cut out and left out of financial innovation and more. And seeing their vision for how the world can go from digital scarcity in the form of Bitcoin to digital scarcity in the form of real estate and entertainment and music has just been really fascinating, and it's been really cool to kind of see their evolution in that process.